Rachel. Judith let out a yawn, rolling over and pushing Frederick off her chest. She blinked a few times, allowing her eyes to adjust to the darkness of her sleeping quarters as she looked across to the next bunk. Still empty. As it always was. Well, maybe tomorrow will be better, Frederick, she said, giving the heavy flamer a small hug before swinging her legs over the side of the bed. Briefly her eyes fell to the scars on her left calf, but she pushed that out of mind as she stood up and grabbed a robe, draping it over her nightgown as she planned out the rest of her day. Mashes and the others need help with repairs, then sparring, then more assistance. She paused. Perhaps Tara will be more willing to open up about Mirshen. Their argument still lingered in the sister's mind, but Tara was going through a lot, perhaps she needed a moment to break and allow the anger to die down. But she didn't have to go that far. Judith shook her head, tying the front of her robe as she turned back towards her bed. The last thing she grabbed were a small strand of prayer beads, worn from use but far more valuable than any other possession of hers, save perhaps Frederick. Ruth would be the only one up, ever diligently praying over their armor and weapons, so Judith would have some time alone to pray and think over the coming day. She smiled, humming a hymn as she trotted down the hall towards their common room. Perhaps if all went well, she and Frederick could spend some time on maintenance. Judith stopped mid-stride as she entered the room. Tara was there, sitting just off to the side of the sister's shrine. The girl looked awful, with great bags under her eyes and her hair in a tangled mess, though her gaze still seemed as sharp as ever as she spotted Judith. "Oh, Tara!" Judith squeaked, stepping back as she continued. I had no idea you were up so early, and here." "I didn't sleep," Tara said, her voice flat. I haven't been able to sleep for days now." Judith remained silent, watching as Tara blinked before rising up to her feet. "If it's too much of a bother, I'll come back later." "No," Judith said, stepping forward and resting a hand on Tara's shoulder. "Stay. You came here for a reason, so there's no need to leave before you have had your say." Tara hesitated, but soon gave a short nod as Judith guided her to Ruth's prayer mat, the sister taking her own as she waited for Tara to speak. And wait she did. Several times Tara made to speak, only to draw back and return her eyes to the shrine. Judith knew it best to let her speak when she was ready, but a little ice-breaking would not hurt. "Would you like something to drink?" she offered. "No recaf, or tea." "Rebecca almost broke my hand the second time I tried to use her tea set," she paused before giggling. "You do not want to know about the first time." Tara ventured a quick smile, but that vanished almost as soon as it had come. "Well, at least she's not mad." Judith looked to the shrine, her eyes tracing the fabric of the cloth in an effort to find the focus of Tara's gaze. That task a failure, she shifted in her seat, her hands brushing against the prayer beads on her wrist for encouragement. Tara finally said, Judith's head snapping in her direction. I'm sorry about what I said, about none of you feeling pain and loss." "I know," Judith replied. "And believe me, I was much the same when I was younger. If it is any help, I forgive you." "Thanks," Tara said. "I have a friend a lot like you, back home." She hesitated. "The thought of me losing her friendship, your friendship, over something I said in a moment's anger. I can't even think about how awful that would be. If your friends are like you, then I am sure they would be quick to understand." Judith offered. Tara fell silent for another minute, Judith reaching over to rest a hand on the other woman's knee. "I'm no stranger to death," Tara said, looking towards Judith. "My grandmother passed when I was little, before the Empress took me under her tutelage. My parents tried to break it gently, said she'd gone to be somewhere nice and safe, but I figured it out a lot quicker than they thought I would. It hurt then, but I was younger and, maybe it passed quicker than it should." She turned away, flicking a stray tear from her eye. "But now, Mirshen's gone. I could have saved him, stopped that thing from killing him, but I didn't." "He saved your life, Tara," Judith said. "If he had not intervened when he did, the daemon would have overpowered and killed you." "You don't know that!" Tara cried, turning back towards Judith as her tears fell more freely. I am the Empress' personal student. I know pretty much everything she knows. I could have done more." "Tara, that Damon had all but knocked you out already. Another strike and Lord Meerschain would be here mourning your loss instead of you mourning his. Tara fell silent, turning away as Judith continued. I know it hurts, and it pains me to say this, but there really wasn't anything more you could have done. The two said nothing, Judith watching Tara as she mulled over what the sister had said. Judith waited a little longer before speaking again. I know how much you admired him, she said. He seemed like the only one that really believed in what I spoke of, Tara replied. Mashes and Korix seemed to humor me at times, you all seemed to think I was crazy. I didn't think you were crazy, Judith chirped. Maybe a little naive, but not crazy. Especially not after you helped make Rebecca a saint. My point is, Tara continued. Meerschain agreed with me. He always spoke of compassion, understanding, and he never tried to counter me with things like that's just how this galaxy is. Under normal circumstances Judith would have laughed at Tara's impersonation of Lord Mashes, but she chose to keep quiet for now. Meerschain wasn't like that, and now he's dead. If his words still ring true in your heart, then he is never truly dead and gone, Judith replied, sitting up straighter before continuing. When I was in training, I was taught that the fallen are taken to the Emperor's side in preparation for the final war against the darkness. That is all well and good, but at times Saint Gracia will come and select a few to return in spirit to the Imperium, for their work was not quite finished when they died. These heroes stay with us in their words, their actions, guiding us subtly from the void so we can complete our tasks. Some are powerful enough to return and become living saints, though that hasn't happened with our convent for some time. Tara looked away, Judith reaching out to rest a hand on her shoulder before continuing. Meerschain may be dead in body, but his spirit and his soul lives on within you. You still hold the message of kindness and gentleness, even when others might have forgotten, and your faith in such matters will keep that message alive within you even when all others fall away. She paused for a moment, looking away and chewing her lip. I sounded a lot like Ruth there, she was always better at this sort of thing than me. You seem to be doing fine, Tara offered before pulling away. But it's easy to say you won't forget, that the soul of someone sticks with you through everything, but what if it doesn't? Judith frowned, clenching her hands as she thought of something to say. Finally, she saw her eyes drifting past Tara, towards the hallway leading to her room. Wait here. I have something I want to show you. Twilight watched Judith disappear down the hall, her gaze lingering as if she expected the sister to return just as fast. When it became apparent that was not going to be the case, she turned her vision back to the shrine, trying her best to keep her thoughts focused on what Judith wanted to show her rather than. Twilight shook her head. No, Judith's wrong. I could have done more, it would have been easy. A shield spell, perhaps, deflecting that final bolt, but then, the creature had broken her last shield so easily, who's to say he couldn't have shattered a new one? Teleport, moving Meerschain out of the way and back to her and the others, and what would her follow-up be, with the daemon still alive? Would she have been able to protect the sisters too? Would that have just led to more death? Would she have saved anyone then? Meerschain, she thought. If Judith's right, and you are still here guiding me, why couldn't I have done more? She sniffed, drying a few errant tears as she continued to wait. Finally she heard Judith return, the sister taking her seat once more as Twilight saw something clutched in her hand. Now, what I'm going to show you is very special to me, Judith said. Only Sister Naomi knows I have this, so promise me you won't tell the other girls. I promise. Twilight was half tempted to make it a full pinky promise, but the possibility of confusing Judith was not something she wanted to deal with right now. Judith hesitated, looking down at the object before taking a short breath and passing it to Twilight. Twilight gingerly accepted the gift, turning it over in her hands to get a better look at it. It was a picture, well preserved in a metal frame. It showed a great statue of a woman, kneeling with her hands spread out as if offering gifts to those below. Sitting beneath the statue were two girls, dressed in similar robes to what Judith was now wearing, small dishes of ice cream in their hands. It was so peaceful, unlike any image Twilight had seen since arriving in the Imperium. The first girl was obviously Judith, perhaps a little plumper and less battle-worn, but Judith nonetheless. She wore a massive smile, and probably more of her treat than she had eaten, but that did little to dampen her spirits as she posed for the picture. The other girl was more demure, regal, only the hint of a smile gracing her lips as she regarded Judith with a sideways glance. "Is that Rachel?" Twilight asked after a minute of studying the picture. Judith nodded before continuing. "This was taken on our last day of training, when the feast of Saint Gracia coincided with our Shrine World's annual spring festival. Our convent is more puritanical than most, and we normally wouldn't participate beyond security and officiating, but Canoness Diana gave us one day to go out and enjoy some time away from our duties." She paused. "From what Sister Naomi told me, she almost had to fight a duel to secure that time. Knowing some of our elders, I wouldn't be surprised. Anyway, we had just been put into our battle squads, and I was lucky that Rachel was put in mine. We'd always done everything together, so that day we went out and enjoyed the festivities." Judith beamed. There were songs, games, dances. They were even handing out those little cups filled with some kind of frozen cream. "Have you ever had anything like that?" "Almost whenever I wanted," Twilight thought, but she quickly pushed that thought out of her mind. A long time ago, I think. I was a little surprised since we didn't get many sweets in the convent, but it was like nothing I had ever had before." Twilight said nothing, watching Judith gush over her memories. "And Rachel, she was always a stoic, but I always knew when she was happy. She just had that kind of air about her. A kind of peace, a shift of the eyes, that sort of thing. Many of my sisters took it for granted, but I knew when she was happy. And that was probably the best day she and I had ever had." Judith paused, her expression dropping. "The last best day, I suppose, for the next day we were boarding our transports and heading to Moria." "I heard you and the others mention Moria before," Twilight said. "But, you never really do more than mention. It's one of the darkest points of the Gracia Convent's service. We have a certain reverence for it, a sort that Sister Naomi was unsure about introducing you to for a number of reasons." "Oh," Twilight said, her spirits dropping. "But if you're going to know about Rachel, I have to talk about Moria," Judith continued, straightening up so Twilight could see her fully. It was then she noticed the sister was fighting tears of her own, chewing her lip to force herself to continue. "Moria is a tech world not too far from our shrine world of Palisades. The tech priests of Stygies 8 used it as a testing ground for their research, but that's about all I was told en route. Some had rebelled against Terra and the Mechanicues, starting a civil war we should not have had much of a part in save that we were nearby and offered to help. By that point the armies of Stygies and the Imperial Guard had arrived in force, and we had assumed we would arrive for some easy mopping up and heretic executions, a good teeth-cutting for all us new initiates. They didn't anticipate us arriving a month ahead of schedule." Judith turned away, her voice quivering. "The Mechanicues don't understand, normal humans at times. To them, we were just more bodies, more guns to bring against the rebels." Canoness Diana protested, but we still found ourselves tossed right into the thick of things, with orders to take down the last line of defenses the tech heretics had for their stronghold. Tempestus stormtroopers or space marines would have been better suited for the mission, but they had us instead, and we suffered for it." She stopped, her voice catching once more. I am sorry, Terra. I'm not normally this choked up about these things." "No, it's okay," Twilight reached out, resting a hand on Judith's shoulder. You don't have to go on if you don't want to." "I have to," Judith said, shaking her head. "If you're going to get better, you need to know about Rachel." "But it's clearly breaking you up," Twilight continued. I know you're trying to help, but I don't want to cause anyone else any more pain." "No. It's better if I say this," Judith paused, flicking away a tear. "Rachel would have wanted me to do this." Twilight's jaw tightened, her mind trying and failing to come up with some rebuttal that would give Judith an out, but nothing materialized. It was wrong to just let a friend be so broken up like this, but then, I've been suffering on my own these last few weeks, and where has that gotten me? "Okay," she said, withdrawing her hand from Judith's shoulder. "Go on." Judith remained silent for another minute, her hands tightening around a wrinkle in her robe. Finally, she spoke. I'm sure I've mentioned this, but there were 30 girls in my training barracks, Judith said softly. 30 girls, just like me, only Ruth and I survived Moria. And Rachel. Rachel was the first of them to die. Judith would have ducked as another volley of artillery shells whistled overhead, but she and Rachel were already moving too fast to be worried about such matters. They did duck when the shells impacted, her ears ringing as the high explosive shells blew hundreds of chunks of earth into the air. Once the rain of earth ended, Judith rose and looked back to Rachel, the other sister rubbing some traitor's blood off her face before looking to her. Are you okay? Rachel asked, her voice impossibly calm. Terrified, but never better. Judith chirped, hefting her heavy flamer up as she turned back to the front. Come on, the others are waiting. Rachel said nothing, quickening her pace as the two sprinted down the line. The Krieg had dug hundreds of fortifications around the city, the myriad of trenches and foxholes making the going difficult for the sisters. Judith stumbled before diving into the next trench, Rachel following soon after and almost bumping into her in the process. Judith! Rachel, the two junior sisters snapped to attention as Sister Superior Madeline stepped past the other retributors in their squad. Why did you fall behind? We were separated by traitors, my lady, Judith explained, holding her heavy flamer close. I apologize for the delay. As you should. We are behind schedule, and Lady Diana needs this sector cleared. Madeline then looked to Rachel, noticing the blood on her face. And what happened to you? Traitor. Judith punched its head off. Rachel replied. It was quite impressive. There was a moment as Madeline gave Rachel an odd look, but finally nodded and ushered them back towards the squad. Judith jogged towards the front, pushing through the others to find her spot before peeking over the edge of the trench. Ahead of them was a vast, dead field. Craters and ruined vehicles of war dotted the landscape, some still pouring smoke and fire from recent hits. Dozens of broken and mangled bodies littered the space between craters and broken tangle wire, mostly Death Corps soldiers, but Judith could see a number of red and black-clad skitarii shattered from the tides of war, and a few of her sisters laying among them. The air was alive with gunfire, bright tracers, and las bolts flying back and forth between the two lines. Judith could see some survivors from previous charges huddled behind wrecks and digging into craters, doing their best to keep their heads down lest the traitors turn their guns on them. Well, it might make things a little easier for us. Judith thought, shaking her head as she focused back on reality. Squad primed, Sister Superior, one sister in the group called. On my signal, start moving, Madeline replied. We'll burn out that trench so the rest of our sisters may advance. Prepare yourselves. Judith could not see her commander, but nodded all the same as she flicked her heavy flamer's pilot light back on. I should really give you a name. Emperor, if it is my destiny to survive this battle, grant me a name for this your blessed flamer. Go, now! Sister Madeline bellowed, climbing up over the edge of the trench. Purge these heretics with bolter and fire. For the Emperor! For the Emperor! Judith and the others cried, rushing up and over the top. She was aware of other groups like them charging out into the open, but all she could focus on right now was the trench ahead of them. And the heavy gun emplacements swinging towards them. They were hit almost immediately, Judith ducking aside as a burst of heavy stubber fire sliced through sisters Caroline and Vanessa behind her. The distances was much too far for her heavy flamer to reach, but the sisters behind her answered with bolters to try and keep some of the heavy gunfire off of them. Rachel was among them. Emperor, please protect my sister. There was a whistle in the air, Judith only getting a chance to look up as something dropped in among them. She threw herself down just as the mortar exploded, shrapnel pinging off her back followed by more dirt and stone. Smoke wafted over her body, causing her to gag as she turned to see if any of her sisters still stood. Sister Madeline, she cried, coughing as she turned about. Sister Madeline! Sister Riza! Rachel, the smoke began to clear, Judith spotting several of her sisters pulling themselves up to continue the charge. 4 would not rise again. Still, Judith found herself crying in relief as Rachel broke through the smoke. Rachel! Judith, Rachel said, her brow bloody from a piece of shrapnel. "Are you hurt?" "No, I'm fine." Judith smiled. "The Emperor protects us today. Keep moving, sisters." Sister Madeline shouted, recovering her power maul from where it had been knocked from her hand. "The trench must be cleared. Judith, lead on." "Yes, ma'am." Judith hefted her heavy flamer around and continued to charge, keeping her breath controlled even as more bullets went whistling past her head. A wet thud told her that another one of her sisters had been hit, but all she could focus on now was the trench. The traitors within. Those who had killed her sisters. "Traitors!" Judith cried, slowing only just as she raised her flamer. "Please send my regards to the Emperor's throne." The soldiers in question had no time to bring their heavy stubber around before Judith pressed down on the activation rune, a wave of fire washing over the trench and the cultists within. Their screams barely rose above the roar of the flamer, Judith sweeping the weapon across the trench as Rachel and the others rushed to her side. Bolter shells and flame rained down on the traitors below, reaping a terrible slaughter as the last of the retributors burned through their foes. "Quickly now, before the traitors can regroup," Madeline called, leaping into the trench and crushing a traitor's skull with her mace. "Judith, move up the trench, focus on those guns." "Yes, ma'am." Before Judith could move, she heard a faint crack of gunfire. A sniper, out of sight for now but still a great danger. She opened her mouth to warn Sister Madeline before her left leg exploded with pain, the sniper's bullet stabbing through her armor and blasting her calf to shreds. "Ow!" Judith squeaked, toppling over as Rachel rushed to her side. Adrenaline dulled some of the pain, but trying to move her leg felt as though she were being stabbed again and again. Sister Madeline. "Sniper. Of course the traitors have no honor," the Sister Superior growled. "We must keep moving before that coward takes another shot." "Judith. Can you move?" "No." Judith bit her lip to keep from crying. "Oh Tara, my leg hurts." "We cannot risk losing our momentum," Madeline said. "We will have to leave you here. We'll signal a medici to pick you up." Madeline stopped, and Judith felt something slipping under her armor. She gave a small gasp of pain as her leg jostled her rescuer, though she bit back her gasps as she was shifted about. "I'm taking her back," Rachel said, a small grunt being the only sound of exertion she gave. "Sister Rachel. The traitors will close in on us if we are not standing together." Madeline barked. "She will be secure here. Let the medici do their jobs. My sister needs my help. Saint Gracia would never allow her sister to fall unaided. Your orders are to secure the trench. My duty is to save my sister." Rachel turned, Judith watching the world spin as they reoriented towards friendly territory. "I'm sorry, ma'am." With that they started off, Rachel springing as fast as she could without jostling Judith further. Judith whimpered, clutching her heavy flamer tightly as bullets traced their retreat. "Rachel?" Judith asked, her voice weak. What was the name of Saint Jaffa's aide? Wasn't it Frederick?" "It was Ferric." Rachel replied, skirting a shell hole to dodge a burst of gunfire. "No, I think it was Frederick." Judith looked to her flamer. "This is my Frederick, he keeps me safe and kills heretics." "Frederick is a nice name. Just be sure to speak with a tech priest to make sure it is all right with them." Judith gave a small smile, even if Rachel could not see it. Her sister was always there for her. Judith blinked a few times as she heard screaming. Very familiar, very angry screaming. She tried to look up, but all she could see was a ruined Lehman Russ executioner that Rachel was making a beeline for. A brief burst of gunfire filled her hearing, bullets sparking off the destroyed tank as Rachel shifted Judith off her shoulders and set her down behind cover. It did not take long for the wounded sister to realize they were not alone. "Controlled bursts, Ruth," a helmeted Sister Superior called, pulling down a second sister as a stream of bullets flew overhead. "Keep firing like that and you will have spent all your ammunition for nothing." "But those bastards killed my sisters!" Ruth cried. "I want them to suffer for what they have done. The Emperor's wrath flows through me and will be spent uselessly if you shirk wisdom and direction." The Sister Superior countered, quickly ducking around the edge of the tank to let out a short burst of gunfire from her combi flamer. The Emperor's wrath is a mighty thing, but only when tempered with wisdom and control. Yes, Sister Naomi, Ruth said, giving a short nod. There was a pause before Ruth turned and spotted Judith. Wait, Judith? What are you doing here? Hi Ruth, Judith said, managing a smile despite the pain in her leg. It was now she could see Ruth was injured too, a large cut running from her scalp to her right cheek. I hope your day's going better than mine. Ruth, you know these two girls? The Sister Superior, Naomi, asked. Why yes Sister Naomi. Ruth said quickly. They were in my training barracks back on Palisades. The Superior nodded, shifting forward to check Judith's injuries. She gingerly lifted Judith's leg, Judith giving a squeak as it throbbed with pain. Sniper, I'm guessing, the older sister said. Fortunately it doesn't look like it hit your bone. Some surgery will get you back on your feet in no time. Judith watched as the Sister Superior ripped a strip of cloth from her tabard, wincing as she wrapped it around Judith's shredded calf. That should stop the bleeding for now. Thank you, Sister, Judith said, any further discussion drowned out by a mortar exploding nearby. Sister Naomi turned her attention to Rachel. Name and squad, Sister. Rachel, assigned to Sister Madeline's Retributors, Squad 17 Epsilon. Rachel replied. Madeline's not one to let her girls run off like this, wounded or otherwise. Naomi drew back, Judith hearing the faint click of the Sister Superior's vox. 17 Epsilon, this is Sister Superior Naomi, come in 17 Epsilon. Madeline, it's Naomi. I've found two of your girls back here. A pause, punctuated by more gunfire. I'd hardly call rescuing a wounded comrade desertion, but I do understand the need. Another pause. Negative. My squad's been shattered and I'm pinned down. I can send the unwounded one back to you, but that's all. More gunfire and another mortar, Rachel shifting to shield Judith from the worst of the blast. Understood, she's on her way back now. Naomi's vox clicked off as she looked back to Rachel. Your squad's being pressed, the Sister Superior said. Return to them and help them break out. No, Rachel replied. I need to protect my sister. She'll be fine under my care, Naomi countered, rising up to look down on the two younger sisters. But we must not forget our duty to our other sisters and to the Emperor. We'll provide covering fire for you. But my sister needs my help. Rachel said, her voice rising ever so slightly. Judith shifted as best she could, so she could look up at Rachel. Rachel, you need to go, she said. The other sister looked down at her, eyebrows raised. But you're hurt, Rachel said. I need to make sure you're safe. I'm safe now, Judith replied, reaching out and resting a hand on Rachel's arm. Sister Naomi and Ruth will look after me, and I have Frederick. Our other sisters need your help now, and we can't let them down, can we? Rachel hesitated. For perhaps the first time since Judith had met her, she showed full worry, her stoic expression slipping away as she looked between Judith and Sister Naomi. Finally, she spoke. Take care of her, she said, taking up her bolter and preparing to duck out of cover. She's my friend. I have no intention of losing another sister under my care today, Sister Naomi said, reloading her weapon before looking to Ruth. On my signal, Ruth, unleash hell on those heretics. I am the voice of the Emperor, and he will find them all wanting, Ruth replied, bringing her bolter up in preparation. Judith pushed back with her good leg, just enough to stay behind the Lehman Russ and out of sight. She looked to Rachel, watching her sister brush her finger across the trigger of her bolter in anticipation. Go, now! Naomi and Ruth popped over the top of the wreck, their bolters roaring as they opened fire on their targets. Rachel gave a short nod, leaping from behind cover and taking a few shots of her own to clear the path. Then, Judith heard it. The faint crack of a sniper rifle, further away but still sharp among the general roar of battle. She winced, her leg throbbing once more, but behind cover she would be safe from such an attack. The wet smack of a bullet hitting flesh stilled her heart, and she could only watch in silence as the shot found its mark. Rachel staggered back, her bolter tumbling from her hands as she reached for her throat. Crimson blood spilled across her hands and chin, the sister trying and failing to stop her severed jugular from bleeding further. Rachel sank to her knees, gasping as she choked on her own blood, her eyes drifting to Judith before she toppled over and fell still, her hands falling limp as blood pooled in a macabre halo around her head. Judith choked, tears welling in her eyes as she watched her sister die. Rachel. I don't remember much after that, Judith said, hanging her head once more. Ruth told me a medic found us and we got back to friendly lines. I spent 3 days in surgery as they rebuilt my leg. For emphasis she rolled up the hem of her robe, Twilight seeing her left calf covered in white scar tissue. It still aches from time to time, especially on remembrance days, but I've managed. I'm sorry, Judith, Twilight started. I had no idea. You never asked, and we never told you. There's no way you could have known about Moria. Judith looked up to the shrine. Almost the entire force Canonis Diana brought from Palisades died that day, cut down by enemies we were not prepared to face. 500 were new initiates, just like me, Ruth, Veronica, and Rebecca. The others were experienced trainers and spiritualists, looking to give a few last pieces of advice to their former charges before we were sent out into the wider galaxy. When they fell, along with Canonis Diana, we barely had the resources to train a new wave of recruits. That's why they call us the Lost Convent, for so much of our blood was spilt, new and old, we are on the verge of going extinct. Silence reigned, Twilight looking to Judith in case the sister wished to continue. Sensing an opening, Twilight spoke. I'm really sorry for your loss, Judith, she said. I can't imagine what it's like to lose so many people you care about. It kind of makes my own problems seem smaller. No. Judith snapped, grabbing Twilight and turning her so they were face to face. Don't ever say anything like that to me again. Whether it's 1 Asteroids or 100 sisters, there is no scale of grief to be applied to loss. You losing Mirshen is no different from me losing my squad, or my commander, or Rachel. Twilight watched as Judith tried once more to bite back her tears, the sister releasing Twilight's shoulder to wipe her eyes. How do you get through all this? Twilight asked. You always seem so chipper and happy, so how do you get through all the pain and loss? Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Judith shrugged. Sometimes I go to sleep and return to Moria. I think it's all a bad dream, and when I wake up, Rachel will be there to comfort me. I know she won't be, but, maybe someday, I think, I'll be wrong. She paused, a smile returning to her lips. But more than that, I dream of the two of us, dancing through the harvest festival, treats in our hands and smiles on our faces, well, my face, anyway. Because that's who Rachel was, not a sister who died horribly and pointlessly on some forgotten battlefield, but my friend whom I loved more than anything save the Empress herself. Twilight chewed her lip, looking to Judith for a moment before turning away. If it helps, think more about Mirshen. Not Forge Father Mirshen, or Lord Mirshen, just Mirshen. Twilight furrowed her brow, casting her thoughts back so she could find moments that best fit what Judith said. A minute passed, Twilight doing her best to grasp memories without breaking down and pulling away. He always wanted to help, she finally said. Not just me, but Masha's, you and your sisters. After everything we went through on Caesarea, I didn't think there were any truly kind people outside my little group, and yet there he was. I was always told the salamanders were among the kindest of the Emperor's angels, Judith added. He always spoke highly of you, in what little time I was ever in his presence, usually during mealtimes. I never expected an Asteroids to be fine with sitting with the likes of us. Yes, Twilight nodded. But he was more than that, wasn't he? Judith continued. You knew him the best of all of us, surely. He helped me on Ryn's world, keeping me balanced when things started getting worse. Mashes and I had our issues, but Mirshen never lost hope in me. Twilight paused as another thought came to mind. You know, he's probably the only person in years to actually shake my hand. Judith gave a little gasp of surprise. Really? Yes. Everyone else was all salutes and bows and occasional glares, and Mirshen offered me a handshake. A pause before Twilight let out a short chuckle. The 8-foot-tall superhuman with glowing red eyes acted more human than most humans I've ever met. Judith joined in with a chuckle of her own. He laughed at my story about kissing Ruth. Definitely human to me. Twilight let out a snort, cupping her mouth in her hand to suppress her laughter. I shouldn't be laughing like this, she started, nibbling on her hand to try and bite back her giggles. Mir Shen would have laughed like this, Judith offered, her grin widening before she continued. Big and scary he might have been, but he was really a. He was like Frederick. Mir Shen was your Frederick. He was, your flamer? Twilight asked, working her jaw for a moment. I don't dash. Both are highly affectionate, comforting, and they love starting fires. Twilight blinked, unsure of what to think of Judith's triumphant grin. It was a simplistic take, even childish, and yet happy, friendly heavy flamer. Twilight snorted again before laughing, rocking back as she tried to contain herself. Oh dear, she gasped. Why you rewrite? I don't know why I didn't see it before, but you're right. I always am, no matter what Ruth says about me, Judith chirped as Twilight continued to laugh. She could feel tears forming in her eyes again, but this time she did not try to fight them. This felt good. Oh, Judith, she said, wiping away a few tears before continuing. I really needed that. Just a chance to feel good again, think about better times. Cherish that, Tara. Judith said, reaching out and resting a hand on Twilight's cheek. Think of it, relish in it, for that is what Mir Shen was and will always be. To think of him only as a casualty of war is to dishonor his memory, just as if I were to think of Rachel as another martyr for the Golden Throne. It will be hard, I won't deny that, but the joy that you have witnessed in your brief time with him will far eclipse the pain that you feel now. Yes, Twilight nodded, feeling her smile growing stronger. Yes, I will. I will never forget Mir Shen, no matter how much it hurts or how long it takes. I might struggle, but I have you, Mashes, and the others. She let out a small chuckle. I will never forget, and I will always remember everything. Judith, you're glowing. I am? Judith asked, looking down at her hands even as her voice shifted. Sure enough, her hands were enveloped in a light pink glow, energy running up and down her arms as she marveled at them. Twilight drew back, giving the sister some room as she tried to make more sense of what she was seeing. Finally, Judith looked up at Twilight, a massive grin on her face. Does this mean I get to be a saint too? That's way better than being a canoness.